Hello and welcome to the reign of Rishi. What's in store for the Lib Dems, for the country, and maybe if we really care about the Tory party? Welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. We're back for another episode. We did think about doing an episode last week, but the news changed about every half an hour. So we decided we'll give it a little bit of time, as in like 2 days, to let the dust kind of settle and have an episode all about our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and what this means. What kind of politician is he going to be? What does it mean for the Lib Dems? Is it going to be help us? Is it going to hinder us? Is he going to pull the Tories out of the bag? We are going to see all that, and we're going to talk about his cabinet as well, which I have fairly strong views that if he had a moment to reset, he probably screwed it up already, but we will get into that with our fantastic panel. We have Hannah Kitchen from the Barnsley Lib Dems. Hi, Hannah.
Hello, everyone.
And we have David McKenzie from, I want to say from Tamworth. Is that near enough, right, David?
Like 20 minutes away, yeah.
Yeah, we'll do. It's all Midlands. No one really cares. No, I'm joking. To those certain Lib Dem podcast listeners who say we never give Midlands enough love, we do love the Midlands. But what do we love about the Rishi Sunak cabinet, David? How would you describe his first job was to appoint his new government? How did he do?
Well, I mean, if you look at the appointments that he's made, in some aspects, I think people would go, oh, he's steadied the ship a bit, but there's an absolute disaster that obviously is the elephant in the room that we're probably going to have to talk about, which is reappointing Leaky Suella Braverman, as the Home Secretary. I cannot stress enough, I was jubilant when she stood down as the Home Secretary, and I basically wrote a post about, I never like to make politics vindictive from a personal perspective. I don't think that's the way you do politics. But I just cannot see anything redeemable about Suella Braverman, and her views are abhorrent. It's quite an ugly style of politics, the way she talks about people, coming to this country. You're simply trying to get away from war and torture, and, in some cases they are LGBT and they're persecuted for that reason alone. So unfortunately, any good he might have done in taking out the likes of, Kwasi Kwarteng, obviously was gone before Rishi came in, but is trying to steady the ship by putting in Jeremy Hunt as the continuation chancellor, and then he's brought, some big beasts off the bench that we can talk about in terms of Michael Gove and so others. But to me, that's completely blown out the window by this dodgy backroom deal that he's done to get the right wing vote by appointing Suella Braverman.
And Gavin Williamson's back. A government of talent, Hannah. But yeah, so your views on that? There's the big train of thoughts were David alluded to the dodgy deal, which I think is what Keir Starmer referred to it in Prime Minister's questions, is the fact that do you think Rishi Sunak shares his view? Because his point, Rishi Sunak does have fairly right-wing views on most things, and in particular the Rwanda policy. Or do you think it was literally just appease the right wing? He's just got to stop the internal fighting.
It's hard to say, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like, in terms of Suella Braverman's breach of the ministerial code, I think Gavin Williamson did rather worse, didn't he? Some time ago. So I think we already know that this government and anyone in it has absolutely, that's honesty, integrity, sticking to the ministerial code. That kind of stuff doesn't mean anything to these MPs and this Conservative government, and hasn't done, really ever since Boris Johnson came into office a few years ago. So it could be, I suspect he simply doesn't care about that. Could it have been a deal? I don't know, because he had the numbers, didn't he? He didn't need to do a deal with Suella Braverman.
But if you had 60,
back and get her vote.
If you had 60 people rebelling, if the ERG wing is 60 to maybe to 80 people, that removes his parliamentary majority, though, doesn't it?
I think definitely. And get rid of Mogg or get rid of Braverman. You had an option of one or the other, and I think he decided Mogg had to go, really, didn't he?
Yeah, and there has been a lot of talk, hasn't there, about uniting the party and not moving forward with a divided Conservative Party, and so that sort of ticks that box. I do think you're right, John. I do think that he is really quite right wing and socially conservative. It's more about social conservatism for me, really.
Yeah.
Suella Braverman's a very concerning appointment, worse than Priti Patel ever was, really, which seems astounding.
Who would have thought we would say that sentence?
The other one that I'm massively concerned and actually frankly disgusted with is Kemi Badenoch as Minister for Inequalities, which is, I mean, it's laughable, to be perfectly honest, John. You know, this is a woman who voted against implementing buffer zones around abortion clinics. I can't remember if it was last week or the week before. You know, we know she's gender critical, aka an absolute raging transphobe, and so from an equalities point of view, it's disgusting that she's been given that post, and I think a very concerning sign of the likely direction of travel of this government. But just purely from but I support women's rights point of view. No, you don't, love. You absolutely don't. You know, that piece of legislation got through Parliament. It got through that Conservative majority, despite how many people like Kemi Badenoch we know there are in the government. So she is, I mean, that is a deeply concerning appointment. Slightly balanced out by the Minister for Education, who's someone you're gonna have to give me her name because I'm bad at names.
I remember. I can't.
Gillian Keegan is the Secretary of State for Education, who I understand is fairly moderate, is very good on LGBT plus rights. So there's a glimmer of hope there. But I mean, what did he have to choose from, really? You know.
Can I just one quick thing on the education thing, right? Because I was driving around in the car today, and they were talking about Gillian Keegan, and this point came up on the radio, and I could not help but laugh because I thought, really, is that the attack line we're going with now? Where they said, obviously she went to state school, which is a great appointment because the majority of this Conservative front bench team are actually privately educated. But then they said, 70%. But then they said, but you know, people have been complaining about the fact that she had a 10 grand Rolex in her official portrait picture, right? Now, I get what people are saying, right? At a time like this, when the cost of living crisis, etc., is what it is, that's a bit much. But at the same time, is that what we've got to attack her on? Can we not attack her on?
I don't get attacks on this. I mean, I think Labour will go heavy on Sunak's wealth. I think the whole idea, he doesn't understand what people are going through. I never really get politics of envy as an effective tactic. Because if you say, look, he's got a Peloton or a £200 auto-warming coffee mug or something like that, I kind of think more people go, that's quite cool, than actually think, I'm definitely not going to vote for him.
But do you know who I think made a good argument about this? And actually, I think it is effective, is that, you know, David Lammy was talking about Rishi Sunak's wealth, and they were asking him, about do you think these attack lines are right? And he said, look, no, first of all, he said, I don't think you should ever judge anybody on their circumstances or, the background that they came from. He said, ultimately, children who are privately educated, that's a decision their parents made, that they did not have a choice. And he said, you've also got to couple that with the fact of you can't live the lifestyle that Rishi Sunak is at this moment in time in the position that he's in and pull the ladder up from everybody else.
Yeah,
he said, he said effectively you can't go, I've got planning permissions in for a new swimming pool and a new tennis court at his home, but at the same time he's cutting universal credit for people. That was what he was doing at the time. It's I think that's effective. That is effective.
But that's exactly my point. You're playing, you're playing the man rather than the ball, if you know what I mean. The thing is, you attack him on his policy. If you attack him on his personal, I don't think it sticks. I think if you do it actually, and I wonder if, and it was interesting, they seem to keep on doing this, the Tories, is I genuinely thought when I was watching, when he was going into the see the King and stuff like that, there's a possibility here for a reset. The press were all over it, and it was so disastrous, Liz Truss, that if Sunak had come straight after Johnson, I think all the stuff that we rightly know, the fact that he was involved with Partygate, all the disastrous decisions the Johnson government made, he was right there with him. Because Truss has acted almost like a little buffer zone, I thought the Tories could do this, could actually have a little bit of a reworking, reimagining of themselves, and it could be a risk. And then he does, Braverman and Williamson, and I just thought, Yeah. It's a bit like when Theresa May said, we are going to be a serious cabinet, and then put Boris Johnson as foreign secretary. And you just think, you had a chance and you ballsed it up. Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Rains website at praetorrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats.
Just circling back a bit, I think the politics of envy is a really lazy attack line that Labour default back to and fall back on, and it doesn't work. Look at what happened in the Red Wall in 2019. They've spent years telling people the Tories don't represent you. They're not ordinary people. They're wealthy. I mean, no one doesn't really stick when you've got Sir Keir Starmer in charge of the Labour parties. He's not exactly a working class man, is he? And I think a lot of people don't care. I think your proper kind of Labourites, people that would never vote anything but Labour, do. But the fact is that the vast majority of people that are involved in politics are people of independent wealth. Yeah. And that's because of something that the Labour Party would absolutely refuse to tackle, which is the fact that MPs simply aren't paid enough.
Yeah.
They're not paid enough money to attract real talent away from the private sector. So you end up with either people like Rishi Sunak, who, effectively it's a hobby for him, isn't it, to be perfectly honest, or people for whom, earning £180,000 a year is absolutely beyond their wildest imaginings. Interesting, actually, I've got someone who I'm friends with on Facebook, who I know is a conservative, really, kind of like a farming type conservative, and she was making some comments on her post this morning about this exact topic, that they're attacking him for his wife being so wealthy. And she basically said, look, the man, he doesn't have to work. He doesn't have to do any of this. He could sit at home with his feet up and just take his kids to Pony Club. He doesn't have to do any of this, and he does. That's good enough for me. So, I think that's where some of the Tories are going to be coming from. It's just a lazy Labour attack line. They need to be very careful about relying on these lazy attacks, because it won't stick, won't work.
And it's one of those things that, and I got the impression just under the I was going to say the dark days of Truss, last week, when the Tory ministers and MPs looked tired, and it kind of goes back to what Hannah was saying. It felt like they could be doing something other than this. Was it worth the nonsense they were putting up with? And it felt just like the Tories were heading over a cliff. Now, I think they're still in a bad place, the Tories, let's face it. And what's interesting about Rishi coming in, that the worst is still to come. And this is the thing, David, that they've got to remember. All the really nasty parts of the hurt and the pain and everything, that's still to come economically.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Obviously, they've pushed back the budget now, the autumn budget statement, until the 17th of November, which would be great. That's 2 days after my birthday, so lovely
I just
thing
think
to look forward to.
Halloween. I honestly think it was as much the fact they didn't want to do an autumn statement on Halloween for the obvious puns that would be in the papers.
But yeah, you are absolutely right. I think if I was a guessing man, I think we're going to see a return to severe austerity, which is going to rear its ugly head and come back. I don't think people this time round are going to be as accepting of that as they have been, because I think back in 2010 there was an element of people saying, we've all got to band together to kind of pull this down, get things back. be responsible with the economy. I think now people are looking and they're going, oh, hold on a minute. There's people who are making obscene amounts of wealth. You know, you look at Shell's profits today. You look at other big companies that are absolutely hammering people on the back of a crisis. I think there's a lot of people that go, well, do you know what? Actually, there's people who can bear the brunt of this first before it comes my way. And I think that's why the Tories are really going to have to look at this windfall tax. I mean, the CEO of Shell today has now said, you know, we're prepared to take that on. You know, we realise that we're going to have to do that. So I don't see how they get away from that.
But what's really interesting is I was elected in 2010. So I was elected in September 2010. So I was right in the midst of kind of tuition fees, and then re-elected again in 2012. So I had to deal with all the austerity hardship that the Lib Dems had to put up with. But there was an argument, and Ed Miliband could never win this argument about, I think the public generally accepted that some sort of cuts had to happen, whether we had overspent, basically not just as a government, but personal debt, business finance debt was all way too high. The problem they've got is because the mini budget, the Kwarteng mini budget, was so disastrous, people now associate the coming hardship with incompetence of the Tory government. And I don't know if they'll ever get that back, because obviously we were in for some rough time anyway, but I think in the public's mind, they now just associate it with a Tory screw up.
So I guess the question is, you know, how good will the Conservatives be? How good will Rishi Sunak be at that reinvention thing that we know the Conservatives are so good at? Because, you know, let's remember that we have only had Conservative governments since the Conservative imposed austerity of 2010. You know, it's never gone back since then. I mean, that was a coalition government, and rather than penalising the Conservatives for that, the country returned a majority Conservative government, and then a minority Conservative government, and then a majority Conservative government. You know, so the Conservatives, as we know, they're just absolute masters of reinvention. And I think the question will be, how can Rishi Sunak disentangle himself from some of the choices he made as Chancellor? Because when I think back to when I was campaigning in Tiverton and Honiton with Richard Ford, you know, we spoke to some proper Tories down there, you know, proper Conservatives, and their complaints with the Conservative government were not limited to Boris Johnson. There was a lot about Boris Johnson, but I had one chap I particularly remember telling me that Rishi Sunak was the most socialist Chancellor in his entire lifetime.
Which is funny, because actually there's a lot, the general, as it shows your public perception to maybe political reality kind of change, because everyone was saying actually it was Boris Johnson that just wanted to spend money, you know, on this, that and everything, and actually Sunak was kind of like, I just want to say no, but I can't. I think it was the you know, the furlough scheme and the lockdown related handouts, you know, as he sort of saw it. So he certainly wasn't massively popular amongst Conservatives for those economic decisions he made. I mean, and we know as well that the membership rejected him quite enthusiastically, and were deemed to have made the wrong choice by the MPs. So they put him in anyway. I suspect he will do a reasonable job of disassociating himself from all of that, from the Liz Truss debacle of the last few. Oh, well, no, that wasn't us, was it? That was when Liz Truss was Prime Minister. Yes, it was you. You're all the same people. It was absolutely you. Will people care, David, if their mortgages go up by hundreds of pounds a month? As in, will they care the fact that it was Liz Truss and not Sunak or whatever? Do you think he will get benefit of the doubt? For me, I think politics moves on quite quickly and they'll just think Conservative. But what do you think?
Well, look, I mean, I've got a couple of things I just wanted to pick up on in the discussion as it was going on there. So, look, Gordon Brown never recovered from the whole attack line of, you know, you crashed. Now, despite we might disagree on this, I think, you know, it was a worldwide economic crash, and I don't think you can lay the blame solely at Gordon Brown's door.
No, I agree.
No, I'm just saying there are some Lib Dems that would disagree with me on that, right? So, but look, there's you know, they never let him get away with that, you know, and even to this day, there's people who associate 2008 with Gordon Brown and the Labour government at the time, I don't see how they get away from this. I mean, if I was Rishi Sunak, I'd maybe be taking the line of, if they pick up the things he did as Chancellor, I'd be like, oh, well, that was 4 Chancellors ago, that was like, you can't leave that in my door, that was 4 Chancellors ago. But I just don't see how you could have, as a party, you can do the damage and the recklessness that they did with the economy and not expect people to remember that for the next 2 years. I think they've seriously got a job on their hands if they're going to get people to come back to them. And I think there's enough people that have, suffered real pain in the last couple of weeks or month that are not going to let that go anytime soon.
And it's interesting. So the first polls come out today show a 5-point uptick in the Tory vote. Labour down 4, we're down 1. I mean, it is a little, from my point of view, it's probably a little bit like a dead cat bounce in terms of that. Those huge chunk of Tories that when it dropped so far went to don't know, or went because they thought Liz Truss was an absolute idiot. Obviously, some of them were going to come back, and it's probably going to come back even more so. But I'm with you, David. I cannot see the Tories holding back this tide, particularly because of the negativity that's already been kind of established. Now, I think you've got your first impression. You've kind of lost it. What about you, Hannah? Do you think the Tories will still be struggling, or do you think he has a very narrow path to get the Tories maybe to somewhere electable?
I mean, I think it depends really about what's to come. I think the last few weeks have been so dire. The repercussions of Truss's mini budget were so immense that, yes, I think there is that feeling now that he's steadying the ship. I mean, he's just U-turned on it absolutely everything she's done, hasn't he? So he's undone all of that. That was just we had a bad 6 weeks. We're over that now. But really, forget about this being a new start. If you imagine he took straight over from Johnson, things are still really, really, really bad. So, we're back to a situation where, the Conservatives are doing absolutely nowhere near enough to tackle the cost of living crisis. Yes, people had those spiralling, mortgage interest rates added to their concerns about their energy bills, their concerns about, their food bills, food's gone up. And I mean, I think there is still a really huge likelihood that we are heading for a massive recession.
Oh, yeah. And I think it might have been David on a previous episode, actually. We were talking about what other governments in Europe had done regarding the energy crisis. And we're saying, like, some countries have, the fact this country's and the Tories, have been so lax with kind of the energy price cap, whether it's the windfall tax is one, but also I think most countries in Europe have absolutely invested in insulation, in energy efficiency, in cutting down usage. And we're actually seeing a drop in gas price. I don't know if anyone saw the wholesale drop in gas, mainly because other European countries have taken all these efficiency steps and have brought down the demand. But our government's not doing any of that. They just seem to be so slow off the mark. And I don't want to make things like they're all thick and useless, but they don't seem to have a massive grasp of what people seem to be going through, David.
No, not at all. I mean, there's but that kind of comes back to, I know we talked at the start about attack lines on people's circumstances, but I do think there is also an aspect of there's too many people there that have no idea about what this oncoming crisis is going to be like for a lot of people, and I just don't know how they're going to relate to, because let's be honest, they won a lot of seats in the red wall areas, right?
And I was going to raise
held.
I was going to raise the thing about the Pendle MP, the chairman, who said, "Well, why don't you just work more hours?" It's like, how absolutely gobsmackingly ignorant can you be of what people are working through?
Yeah. And there's like, you kind of, you throw it out as ridiculous, but then you go, oh, actually, yeah, she's out of Parliament, but this seems to be the prevailing thought, is when what's her face, that used to be the would have been my MP South Derbyshire, her name's gone right out of my head now, slept with John Major,
Edwina Curry.
Edwina Curry. Edwina Curry saying, "Oh, just put some foil behind your radiators. That'll help with your."
Martin Lewis respond to that.
Oh, well, did you not see the guy who put up a picture where he'd plastered it all over his walls and went, "Well, I've got it on every part of my walls, but I can't afford to put the heating on. So how does this help me?" Like, it's just that they're so removed from the reality of what people are going to go through or are going through at this moment in time.
I think it fundamentally isn't a priority for them. And I think what we need to keep an eye on as, political activists is the stuff that they sneak through whilst everyone is massively distracted with the cost of living crisis, and asking them why they are doing nothing to tackle the cost of living crisis. They're waging a culture war against LGBT people, particularly against trans people. We saw that in the leadership election, putting Kemi Badenoch in that post. Things are going to get, I think, really, really dire over the next couple of years. I think there's potentially some kind of, new Section 28 type stuff coming. So, they're on with that. Remember as well, the stuff they've been doing around elections. So they've removed I can't remember what it was, alternative vote, SDV, I can't remember, whatever it was.
From all elections, like in London Mayor and stuff like that.
Yeah, from all the regional mayor and Police and Crime Commission elections, that's gone. Voter ID is coming in for next May's local elections, which is just an absolutely mind-boggling, gobsmackingly massive thought. I would not be surprised if, between now and the general election, they put in some stuff that becomes really hard for any new government to undo. So, obviously what we want, we don't want Labour to win a majority, because if Labour win a majority, we can wave goodbye to electoral reform for good. We want some kind of Labour not quite getting enough of a majority and therefore having to give us proportional representation in exchange for our support. I wouldn't be surprised if the Conservatives weave a load of stuff into the legislation that makes that really quite hard, to implement when we get around to it. And then, of course, all the stuff about immigration. Suella Braverman has made her feelings very, very clear on that, in, as David says, really quite unpleasant and divisive language.
A Tory councillor in a public meeting in Preston, as a scrutiny meeting, talked about an invasion of migrants across the Channel. He is of the rightest of right wing within the Preston Conservative Party, but there is that prevalence, and apparently all these people, the Suella Braverman thing, all the politicos out there and the lobby journalists are all saying, the small boats crisis is one of the things that most exercises the right, the ERG right of the thing, other than Brexit. But you think, and anyone who's at all sensible says, well, why not give them safe passageway into the country then? And they
won't have to get on boats.
Yeah, exactly. And I made a joke in the last podcast. I said, what has Suella Braverman done? Is she happy that she's pushed a child into the English Channel and things like that? Because I can't work out what they're thinking, because we're not going to fix this economy without immigration. And I've always been pro-immigration, even, because I'm bold enough in my views to say, actually, I don't care what the crazy right-wingers think. We've always needed immigration, and we now need it more than ever, and we should be proud of saying that. Now, what's interesting about how the Lib Dems deal with this, because I'll say that quite publicly, but we're not massively strong on it, I would say. I think we're the best, but actually there is still a fear of saying anything that might upset little Englanders.
Let's just take a moment here, John, please, to remind ourselves that on matters of immigration, the Labour Party are equally as rancid as the Conservatives. We had Rachel Reeves a couple of weeks ago basically trying to out-Tory the Tories, and then Keir Starmer, that I saw some quotes basically admitting that you couldn't get a fag paper between Labour and the Tories on immigration. And I know they say campaign to the right, govern to the left, but this is why I've never been Labour. Sorry, David, because they're just not good enough for me on stuff like, immigration and human rights and civil liberties. And that's a depressing thought, really, to be honest, that the Conservatives are, going to be waging this sort of quiet little war, probably not even that quiet, probably quite a noisy war against immigration, with Suella Braverman in charge of the Home Office, while everyone's distracted with the cost of their heating bills. And the Labour Party can do absolutely nothing at all about it.
I want to ask David a question on this, actually, because I think the only reason Labour aren't pushing for stronger ties with Europe, as in customs union and single market, is because they're shit scared of freedom of movement. I think it paralyses their view. Even though we all know, you look, I speak to I had an education scrutiny yesterday, and officers said we just don't have enough educational psychologists, we don't have enough carers, we don't have enough people to fill all these vacancies. And it's happening with the charity I'm a trustee of, the council vacancies. You see shops and restaurants and hotels, and Labour are paralysed by it, David. And I'd love, as a former member, obviously you've talked about you've still got lots of links with Labour. How can you possibly move forward if you're terrified of saying anything good about immigration?
Well, I mean, they ultimately, even when I was in the Labour Party and they brought out that ridiculous bloody mug, right?
Yeah,
points-based immigration system mug, cheers. You are right. There is look. Ultimately, the Labour's in a tough position when it comes to how they campaign on this, because the majority of the seats that they want to win back are the seats that went to the Conservatives and had a creeping UKIP vote because of people's views in those areas on immigration and people coming to this country. But ultimately, for the economy to bounce back, there needs to be a mass level of immigration coming into this country because of aging population and the fact that we don't have enough people to do the jobs that we need doing. I mean, obviously, John, we talked there about skilled work, but we don't even have people that will pick fruit, that will help feed people in this country. So, the people that are coming here now, I just want to touch on a couple of things, because there was something that I found deeply, deeply troubling today, and I sort of slightly touched on it on Twitter earlier, and that was obviously yesterday the Home Office Select Committee were discussing about the migrant boats that were coming across the Channel. Now, there has been, and I think there is a level of reality that we need to view on it about Albanian gangs that are sending people on these migrant boats across the Channel. But the reality is that's a very, very, very small percentage of the actual people that are coming from war-torn countries like Libya, like Syria, parts of Africa, Eritrea, all over Iraq, Afghanistan, that are trying to get to this country because they are fleeing persecution. But that is being hyped up, this small percentage of people that are being troublemakers to fuel a base, right? Now, there was a lady that phoned into the radio today, and the language that she used, that in my opinion is inflamed by people like Suella Braverman and the things that they're saying, where she was talking about, why are we letting people come over here when there's indigenous people of this country that need money? Now, my reaction to that was, first of all, that's the language of Nick Griffin, right? Yeah, there is no such thing as an indigenous population of the UK. We do not have an indigenous peoples. We are not Aborigines. We are not First Nationers. We are not, tribes in the Amazon, etc. We are a mixed race of many different cultures that settled in this country. Now, people who are coming from other places for a better life are simply seeking that. They are not out there to rob you, to take money from you. They want to contribute. They want to be part of the economy. And the reality is that we need to recognise we need these people. We need people that want to come here and want to work. And, our economy is going to suffer more as a result of not hitting the reality on that.
And the same nonsense was peddled by the AfD in Germany. You remember when Germany took in I think it was like 1 million refugees, and it was, you're not, your daughter's not going to be able to walk down the street, and there'll be increased and it was completely and utter horseshit. Let's just put it. It was absolute nonsense, and it hasn't had detrimental effect at all. In fact, Germany's economy it was interesting about Brexit. The British economy was 90% of the German economy before 70%. Brexit. It's now 70% now. And I think immigration is going to rear its ugly head a lot over the next year. Go on, Hannah.
And the thing is, I mean, as you say, we maybe don't shout about it because it's not a popular message, but I do think that as Liberal Democrats, we are unequivocally, pro-immigration, pro-freedom of movement, pro being a place of compassion and sanctuary for, asylum seekers and people seeking persecution. I think, there are so many ways that the Labour Party could spin this. If you don't want to be a liberal, compassionate human being, which obviously they don't, then, there's the economic route, the National Health Service. I worked for the NHS for a number of years between sort of 1998 and sort of 2010, while the Labour Party were in charge of the country. And, during that time, we had huge numbers of overseas, particularly nursing staff, but also overseas doctors, people coming into the country specifically to work in the National Health Service, because you just can't train people up quick enough. And so, Labour's massive, great big ticket is Labour would save the NHS. All right, Keir. All right, Rachel. How are you going to do that without freedom of movement? How are you going to do that without immigration? Because actually, after Brexit, scores and scores and scores of NHS staff, and that's everything from, cleaners, porters, up to highly skilled NHS professionals left the country because they no longer felt welcomed here. Our NHS cannot work and it cannot function without immigration. It couldn't function in the early 2000s when I worked in, and it can't function now. One of the reasons it's on its knees. So how do the Labour Party marry those two positions up? We don't want immigration, but we want to save the NHS. Nonsense.
You can't. And then you talk about pensions as well. I think there's like 4 workers for every pensioner at the moment. That's going to go down to 2 workers. We are on the wrong side of this curve. And the only way to deal with it is actually to have more immigration into this country. But what we're talking about immigration, in case listeners have wondered why we're talking about immigration, it's actually because we're trying to figure out what the Sunak premiership is going to be about. And for me, he has very right-wing tendencies in a lot of the things he stands for. And I wonder if their push comes to shove, we're getting into the general election rhythms now, probably 2 years to it to come. I think that will be a default to please the base of the Tories. And I think what Lib Dems have to do is actually really hammer. I think actually our messaging has been pretty good about competence and stuff like that. And loads of Tories, me, Hannah, we were in, I think, all 3 of the election victories we had. The Tories that we spoke to on the ground weren't frothing right-wingers. They were people who they were centre-right, big about. They were centre-right, kind of moderate Tories. They wanted their country to be governed well, for the government to look after their money, and you can't say that about this current Tory government.
Just to pick up on that, John, I think there's a couple of things that would be useful to maybe at least put on the table or discuss if we wish.
Yeah.
I don't see how we as a party don't benefit from Sunak being in place. I actually think that Labour suffers more from Sunak being in place, because there will be a difficulty. And if you look at his cabinet as well, and also the mandate that he keeps going back to of the 2019 manifesto, he's still going to be pushing the lines, might be a different person, but pushing the lines that Boris Johnson was pushing, that actually turned off a lot of the blue wall voters to Johnson's government. Now, I also have to believe that there's a number of people in blue wall seats that have looked at the disaster of what happened with Liz Truss, that has completely thrown the idea of competent government out the window, and they'll be looking at how does Rishi Sunak respond to this. But then they'll also be looking at, again, he's talking about levelling up, he's talking about all these things that they're still going, well, I've got problems down here in the south. It might seem like a lovely leafy suburb, but there's still problems here.
Yeah.
About how he marries those two positions together. And actually, I think that leads to a real benefit for us as a party. And actually, it's probably more difficult for Labour, because he's going to put his focus back onto the seats they won in 2019.
Yeah. Hannah?
Yeah, I totally agree with David. I think the I mean, the perplexing thing about everything that Liz Truss did, I remember saying to my husband at the time, like, whose votes is she trying to win? With all of this, I don't really understand economics, but I understand, trying to win elections. And it was just truly perplexing that, that mini budget just appealed to no one. Even the super rich weren't particularly pleased with it. They were like, well, all right, I've got another 15 grand in my pocket, but, the country's going to rack and ruin, so what's the point? Whereas Sunak's agenda it's much clearer. And particularly the stuff we're talking about around immigration and culture wars, that much more clearly appeals to those red wall seats that came Conservative in 2019 via that route of historically Labour, little bit racist, UKIP, Brexit, Conservatives. And I think the kind of agenda that he's on with sets out a clearer route to the Conservatives retaining those seats and it being harder for Labour to keep it. Will they vote for a brown Prime Minister? Who knows? We'll have to just wait and see. So I think that, where Labour were in the polls the other week was frankly absolutely horrifying. That's
and it's interesting looking at the by-election result, the council by-elections. I mean, some people were like, oh my word, the Lib Dems lost a seat to the Tories last week, which is congratulations to the Lib Dems that won.
Labour voters voted Labour. That's why. Yeah. Labour were flying high in the polls. They got all, arrogant and yes, we can win everything. We don't need to be squeezed and vote for the Liberal Democrats instead. So they voted Labour, undid the squeeze. Tories win. And when Labour are doing as well as they were a couple of weeks ago, that is a massive, some of those polls that came out that said the Conservatives were going to win 4 seats, it's absolutely ludicrous.
And I was at the Northwest Conference the other day. It was last weekend. And, there's quite a lot, what does this mean for Labour? What are we going to do? We're never going to win a seat in this area ever again. And things. I said, you can't control what happens nationally. Generally, if you're a campaigner, which I know a lot of our listeners are, says there will still be thousands upon thousands of lazy Labour councillors, lazy Labour MPs, and lazy Labour councils, all of which will be looking for someone to take out their displeasure on, and hopefully they'll then vote for you. But you've got to earn it. I'm sorry, Lib Dems, we don't get free votes. You've got to graft your ass off and win those seats because they won't give it to you. And I am still really glad the party, and we talked about this on a previous episode, Hannah, about the party's targeting seems to be about right. They're not letting people get there ahead of themselves. They're not thinking, oh, we're going to win outer Lincolnshire or whatever, one where, we haven't had a candidate in however long and we have no councillors. I think there's a little bit of reality now in the HQ saying, we know what part we've got to play. And wherever you are in the country, I don't care if you're on your own as a councillor, if you're in a tiny group, you can do something in that area and you can make that little bit of difference. And I think that's the point we've got to hammer in, because I am not going to be an MP at the next general election. Here's touch wood, that is not going to happen. But I can campaign my ass off to make sure the Tories don't do stupid things, Labour don't do stupid things, and maybe get a few wins on the way. That's my role.
You're absolutely right. The way we're polling at the moment, we're definitely not going to get ahead of ourselves. And the party are very, very focused on targeting and on, encouraging people to continue to build at local council level, because, even, in areas like Barnsley where, we're not going to get an MP in Barnsley, that's not going to happen. But it would be nice to save our deposits.
Yeah, I think we will. I think I don't know.
but despite that, we're still the official opposition to Labour on the council. We're still holding the Labour Party to account. Just because they get the MPs and they're polling really well and they've run the council for 5,000 years doesn't mean they get a free pass. There should still be someone holding them to account, and the Tories don't do that around these parts. So therefore we do, and and that's the case in a lot of places. There's in areas where Labour are in no fit shape to provide any kind of an opposition or any kind of alternative to the Conservatives, that is what we are there for. And hopefully, when things settle down a little bit and the Labour hubris dies down and the polls even out, we will get back to that place where there's a realisation that, yes, there are seats that they can win from the Tories, and yes, there are seats that we can win from the Tories. And that's the way that, we get rid of this Conservative government and hopefully get electoral reform as well.
And also, Labour doesn't have to do any deals with dodgy nationalists as well.
Absolutely. So a couple of news things that have just appeared up, and this kind of shows you, we're going to finish kind of on this bit where me and David touched on it briefly before about some of the issues that are coming down the line. The awkward stuff, the electorally hurtful things the Tories are going to have to do. Firstly, Number 10 has refused to commit to the pensions triple lock.
A week after it was committed to,
that is going to be an absolute election nightmare for them if they do that. So that's something. And the other big one is it looks like there's going to be new elections in Northern Ireland, and this kind of leads into it looks like the DUP has blocked. I had strong views, and I think the DUP, if they don't want to be in power, then they should do power without them. I mean, that's maybe controversial, and there's people, Northern Irish people might have a different view, but I don't think... I know, because the thing of the Good Friday Agreement, I completely know that, but you can't have one... It's not a democracy. If one side says, oh, we're not going to take part, then it doesn't happen. I think they have to... If DUP don't want to do it, but everyone else does, including unionists and non-aligned people like the Alliance Party and things like that, then you can't just have the unionists like just holding out and then having no Northern Irish Assembly. But how that gets fixed, the Northern Irish Protocol, I don't see a way that doesn't screw over the Tories one way or another, because it was a conundrum that killed Theresa May, and I don't know how they fix that. So there you go. Two big issues that they've got coming up: the economy, Northern Ireland, and relationships with Europe, none of which are clear, and all of which they're going to annoy someone on some side.
Just quickly to touch on the pensions, John. Let's be honest. The majority of the Conservative voting population are of a certain age. If you look at voting intentions, and obviously, look, we all know fine well that people move on their political views as they get older. Some of us go from being raging socialists when they're a teenager to being maybe more centre ground. And I might not be speaking about anybody in particular there. That's Vince Cable. There's a problem that the Tories have got on their hand, that they have an aging voting demographic, and that's the people that they're going to hammer for their pensions. Yeah. I mean, how do you marry that together? And I think they might have to climb down on that, because I think Rishi's people behind Rishi will be saying that's not going to go down well for us if we plan on winning an election anytime soon. And add on to all the other stuff that they've got problematic coming down the line.
Lloyds have just said house prices to fall by 8% next year. They will get hit on so many different levels over this next year. But I suppose final question to you guys: no change in terms of when you think general election? We're looking at 2024, or do you think the Tories might go sooner?
I'll very quickly give my view on it. Look, I think the last time we spoke, I thought we could be close to a general election, but we've had a change of Prime Minister in that time. I think if Truss had have continued in post, it would have been very, very difficult for the Tories to try and avoid that. I think that's out the window now. I think they are very much in the mindset of and if you look at as well, Sunak's speech in front of Number 10, he is pushing this point that we have a mandate from 2019. Mm-hmm. I was the Chancellor at some manifesto we put together, blah, 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 blah. They are going to write this out for the 2 years that they have left and hope that they can do something to pull things back, at least even if it's not to have as big a defeat as they were expecting to have a couple of weeks ago.
Final word from you, Hannah. Your predictions for way forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, same as David. I thought a few weeks ago they might, if they got rid of Boris and got a good bounce, they might go for it. They did not get a bounce. It was not a bounce. It was a plummet. There's absolutely no chance they're going to go to a general election. No chance. I don't think. I think they can see the writing on the wall, and I think Rishi will have his 2 years of being Prime Minister and getting as much absolutely rancid stuff through with his 80-seat majority as he possibly can, that makes it really hard for whoever the next government is to unpick all of that. I think he's seen one Prime Minister go in 6 weeks. There's no way he wants his name adding to the list of shortest serving Prime Ministers. I would be astounded if it's before 2024. Really astounded.
And I want to just think, because Lib Dems might be a little bit, oh my God, given what you've just said, Hannah, might be like, oh, this is just going to be the worst 2 years. How can we possibly stop them? Again, I want to do my usual battle cries. They've reversed on fracking already because
we didn't even talk about fracking, John. Oh, yeah.
I know. Well, obviously, where I live, obviously, it's a huge issue. And I mean, if I was a Tory MP, I'd be absolutely fuming. So Mark Menzies, who's the Tory MP for Fylde, and part of my county division is in his constituency, has obviously been highly vocal against fracking. They flogged him to vote to end the ban, and then changed their mind a week later. You'd just the fury you'd have. I mean, you'd say, what a stupid guy for doing it anyway, when they would have got it through. But the fury you'd have as that MP. But I want everyone just to be aware that you can make changes in opposition. This is a powerful opposition can do things and can stop things. And I think there'll be some horrendous things that come, Hannah, but there will also be some horrendous things we might be able to stop. And next year's local elections are one of the biggest sets. They've got lots of areas that Tories control. 2019 was a terrible year for the Tories, but they're still defending thousands upon thousands of seats next year. And if we can get our act together, because again, like we talked about, there'll be areas like the places I fight in Preston, we're Tory facing. No one else is going to beat those Tories but us. If you do that, and enough of us do it, they can change course or pause things or do whatever. So never feel like it's not worth doing. Be part of those little victories that add up to a lot. And that's kind of my finishing rallying cry. Unless, David, you want to come in?
No, like the only thing I was going to say is to people who feel like, as you said, John, like helpless, or they feel like there's not really much they can do. Although there is a lot of time between now and the next general election, there are elections coming up that it will be very, very difficult for the Tories.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, 2 years, there's going to be some by-elections in there as well. Time to give them a kicking. Get off the bench and let's help us do it. And we've already had some fantastic bloody wins in the last year.
Historical.
Let's see what else we can. Let's see what else we can do, because I think there's more to come.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Dave, for coming on and talking about the start of Rishi's reign. We've got loads of things. Actually, I find it really interesting, the conversation we just had, immigration, and maybe we'll actually have a proper episode on that, actually getting through it, because it is such... I want to kind of get ahead of some of these topics that the Tories want to do on, and talk to the campaigners and saying, look, like, don't be afraid to talk about it, because we're starting to get these questions coming up on the door. Those of you that are canvassing at the moment know you're getting general election sort of questions coming up on the door. Actually having the confidence to say, this is what I believe because of X, Y, and Z. We're here to help you with that anytime. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching and listening. By all means, subscribe to us, give us a like, give us a follow. Follow David and Hannah, always top work on Twitter and other social media. You can follow the podcast social media at Lib Dem Pod. We'll be back with more episodes very soon. But in the meantime, have a good weekend.